Welcome everyone to the third Sammies Summer Series of the year. I'm Maggie Moore, a Senior Manager at the Partnership for Public Service, and it is my pleasure once again to introduce today's conversation. The Samuel J. Heyman Service to America Medals, or the Sammies, honor exceptional public servants who have made a tremendous impact on all of our lives. We created this award more than 20 years ago to build trust in our government, to inspire more people to join government, and to honor those who have really shown the best of government. With this virtual event series, we spotlight the dedicated and hardworking Sammies finalists from this year. Our 27 finalists, both teams and individuals, represent the true breadth of the important work that's being done across government to make all of our lives just a little bit better. Throughout the summer, we've heard how government leads around the world, delivers services to the public, and soon we'll be discussing leading in innovation and technology. If you're interested in joining future events in this series, please go to our website at ourpublicservice.org/events to learn more. Today, though, we're going to be discussing the many important ways the government demands transparency and accountability, both from itself and from the private sector. The conversation will be moderated by my colleague, our Executive Vice President, James Christian Blockwood, and our panel includes Lisa Shao from the Department of Justice, who is a Sammies finalist for securing huge penalties across major corporations engaged in detrimental, unfair, and deceptive trade practices. We are also joined by Robert Gorman from the Department of Transportation, who is representing the Office of Aviation Consumer Protection team for their work to ensure that airlines refund travelers for canceled or significantly delayed flights, something I think we can all relate to. And lastly, unfortunately, we are not joined today by Melissa Emery-Aris from the Government Accountability Office, who is feeling a little under the weather. She led investigations and proposed recommendations that have helped millions across federal student aid access federal student aid and have their student loans forgiven while rooting out fraudulent student loan practices. Welcome to Lisa and Robert. James Christian, over to you.
Great, thank you so much. First, let me start by thanking both you, Lisa and Robert, for your service. And let me congratulate you on being a Sammies honoree. As a former career executive myself, I know what it means to serve and all the work that you do day to day on behalf of the American public. When you think about this, regardless of an individual's personal or political views about government, most nearly everyone can agree that they want it to work well. In order to do that, they believe that it needs to be transparent and it should be accountable to those they serve. I'd like to start with a question for both of you and would want to know, obviously the work that you're doing helps to ensure good government. And I think it's great, and I think it's an important service to the country. But it's not a path that's chosen by or even a path that's for everyone. And so let me start with my first question to you, Lisa, and then Robert, it'll be the same question to you. What drew you to public service?
I had always thought about public service as an avenue when I decided to go to law school many years ago. And, I graduated from college in the late 80s and moved to Washington and saw that there was a path for lawyers where you could actually work with the government, whether in a legislative capacity or litigating in the courts as I do now. And that was always something that was interesting to me. It took me a long time to get to government. I was in private practice for many years before I finally found what I consider my dream job, which is at the Department of Justice at the Consumer Protection Branch in the Civil Division. So it was a long time coming, but I'm really glad I got here.
Well, I know it may have taken you a long time to get here, but sure glad you found your way there, and that is your dream job. Same question to you, Robert. What drew you to public service?
Sure. Well, I guess I would start by echoing Lisa's remarks that I had always felt that that would be a possible career path for me going into law school, just knowing that a law degree generally provides a lot of flexibility in terms of ways to serve, ways to help. Certainly, my law school focused a lot on public service as a goal, an admirable goal, or a potential career path. When I graduated from law school, though, for some reason, government service particularly was not really on my radar. I sort of got the impression that maybe the two avenues were judicial clerkships or working for nonprofits. I actually took neither of those routes immediately out of law school. I did go into private practice. I was only there for 2 or 3 years in a couple of law firms. And by that time, and in fact, had almost immediately thought that path was not for me. So after about 3 years, I did start looking at judicial clerkships, but actually in the state court system. I was in Pennsylvania at the time, and I cold called every judge in Pittsburgh and found a judicial clerkship on the appellate courts of Pennsylvania. Frankly, because a friend of my wife's had told me, "Hey, have you thought about state court clerkships?" And I had never thought about that coming out of law school. It turns out that became a career path for me, and I was a career law clerk to judges on Pennsylvania's appellate courts for 15 years. And it was a great life. It felt like, you were doing public service work to help to decide appeals. Then when my wife moved, got a job at the National Cancer Institute in DC, that moved us down to the DC area. And after a somewhat lengthy job search, I ended up at the Department of Transportation and in the position that I'm in now. And I love it. It's been a great experience. I've been with the DOT now for about 12 years, and it's a terrific mix of public advocacy, rulemaking, enforcement, and helping ordinary consumers.
Yeah, government provides such a wonderful opportunity, and it's unfortunate that it's not on a lot of people's radar from the beginning. And, there are things that you can only do in government. Perhaps there's a view that maybe holding government and others accountable is one of those inherently government tasks. What do you think about that? And do you see your role that way? And do you see the role of government that way? And I'll start with you, Robert.
Well, I think government, broadly speaking, at least at the federal level, does make many efforts to keep itself accountable through the checks and balances systems, but more specifically, as you know, James, you used to work at the GAO, which is an office that does serve to keep federal agencies accountable for their work, and also recommends ways that different agencies can improve how they're doing their current jobs. Any institution can get into a rut where they're working on a particular pathway or a way of doing business that has been the way they've done it forever, and maybe it's not the most efficient way of doing things. Maybe it's not the most effective, and sometimes you need another agency, another branch to take a look and recommend changes, and that can only be for the good. Certainly, ethical principles that apply within our department and within every federal agency keep ourselves honest, and transparency comes through things like the Privacy Act and the Freedom of Information Act. I'm responding to a Freedom of Information Act request right now, so it is definitely important to keep the public apprised of what we do. And then we do it for just also to let the world know that we're out there doing good work. That's why we put out press releases, and at least on our side at the DOT, we keep our website open and updated with all of our new initiatives.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I saw a lot of that good work firsthand when I was at the GAO with my colleagues there. Lisa, same question to you about your view on holding government accountable and whether that's an inherently government function or at least how you see your role in that endeavor.
So at the Consumer Protection Branch, I think we have a unique, we are uniquely accountable because what we do every day is bring, investigate and bring enforcement actions against, people and companies that are engaging in unfair, deceptive, or criminal practices against consumers. We're protecting consumers from dangerous products, from dangerous devices and drugs and practices. And so we are always responding to consumer and other government agency concerns, constantly. And those change all the time. When I first started at the department 13 years ago, the work I did was food safety, and I had a major telemarketing case against somebody, a major company that was engaged in significant telemarketing violations. Now the cases that I see, many, if not most of them, involve data privacy violations, misleading consumers. And I think that as society evolves, the work that we do in the branch evolves in order to respond to the way, to what people need from us. I anticipate that is going to continue. We also, as you can imagine, frequently get requests from members of Congress, from various federal agencies. We just started working with the Department of Transportation. We recently started working with the Drug Enforcement Administration on Controlled Substances Act cases to target pharmacies and distributors that are, were contributed to the opioid crisis. So I feel like the work that we do is actually uniquely accountable, and I think we do a great job at trying to get results for people.
Yeah, very interesting and important work. Lisa, let me spend a little bit more time kind of learning more about the work that you do. You've achieved major victories protecting the public from harmful, misleading trade practices by businesses across a wide range of industries, including securing some of the largest fines in U.S. history. Can you share a little bit more about how the Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission work together to protect the American public in this way?
So people don't really know this outside of, or even inside of government, but there are many federal agencies, including the Federal Trade Commission and Food and Drug Administration, that actually are required by statute to refer certain types of cases to the Justice Department to litigate. And for the Federal Trade Commission, it is cases where civil penalties are being sought, and those are sought generally if somebody is violating an FTC rule, like the telemarketing sales rule, or if you are violating an FTC order. And the FTC does a great job investigating and developing cases, and then they send the case over to us and say, "Hey, will you bring this case?" They refer it to us. We then, at the department, decide to take the case or not take the case. I would say, in probably 85% of the cases, situations, we accept the case and we litigate it if it's litigated. The FTC also settles many of their cases, and we will often accept and file those settlements under the United States. So, in the past 10 years, I litigated a case against Dish Network for billions of telemarketing violations. We ultimately ended up litigating the case, going to trial, winning at summary judgment, winning at trial, getting affirmed on appeal. And at trial, we won a $280 million penalty. Nobody had ever won a litigated civil penalty of that magnitude before. And ultimately on appeal, the judgment was vacated, but we ended up settling the case for $168 million. So again, I mean, in these telemarketing cases, nobody had ever really litigated one to judgment before, and it was a very significant win, not only because of the money and the money that the government, and we had 4 state plaintiffs, they also all received millions of dollars, but it really sent a message to companies that engage in telemarketing that you could be on the hook for a lot of money if you engage in telemarketing violations. Now, of course, all of us continue to be victimized by unscrupulous telemarketers today, and I am not alone in that. I know that it's still a big problem, but it is not such a big problem now from legitimate companies. You know, Dish Network is a Fortune 200 company, and so we are now turning our attention to try and get people who are engaged in scams and telemarketing violations from outside the United States. Another big case that I had, which was negotiated by the FTC, was a $5 billion settlement against Facebook, now Meta, where Facebook was deceiving people about the data privacy protections that it was affording them, and was also not telling them that it was sharing their information, if you're a Facebook user, with third-party apps that, for example, that are available on Facebook. And so that was a significant case. My role in it was primarily in defending the settlement and getting the court to enter the settlement. And so, all of these cases, again, all that money goes to the Treasury, and it's very helpful to the government to be able to collect those large penalties. So those are just a couple of the cases. I mean, I right now have about 50 cases on my radar that are some big, some small.
Yeah, seems like a lot of cases, a lot of important ones, and very impactful work that you're doing. Lisa, can you tell us a little bit more about, potentially one of those cases that may have set precedent in both protecting the public, but also maybe affecting public policy and how organizations operate in the future?
I mentioned a little bit about the impact of the Dish case. The Dish case was important in many respects. Not only was it a big telemarketing case and really the only major telemarketing case to go to trial as a government enforcement action, but it was also a case that, again, sent a message to industry that you can't violate these rules. I mean, nobody before we won our case thought that a bunch of telemarketing calls was going to result in millions and millions of dollars in penalties. And, not only did we win our case, but there was at the same time, a private plaintiff went to trial against Dish and also won $400 million in penalties for many of the same telemarketing calls under the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, which is another federal telemarketing statute. So I think in terms of public policy, it sent a big message to government agencies, including the Federal Trade Commission, that these cases can be litigated and won with significant victories. The win obviously gives us money, but it also sends a significant deterrent message to industry. The injunctive relief we got was also significant, and it is being cited in cases, many, many cases going forward in terms of, the various legal standards that we were able to establish that we litigated have now been used and are being cited in cases going forward by not only private litigants, but other government cases. So I think that a big case like that, although it's expensive and time consuming, I mean, we litigated for over a decade, but when you win, it has a large ripple effect that I think really helps people. And again, it sends the message to legitimate companies that you can't do this. The Facebook case is the same thing, right? I mean, Facebook and Twitter and other big American companies are now under orders saying you can't deceive people about how you use their data or how you're sharing their data, or if you're collecting information and you're saying it's for two-factor authentication, it can't be to be used for marketing. All of those things are helping, I think, set up guidelines and guardrails for American companies to know this is how you are supposed to operate, this is how you cannot operate. And it, I think, has a prospective effect because people know what the expectation is so that they can avoid enforcement actions going forward. So again, I mean, I consider all of the cases we do really impact litigation that not only punishes wrongdoers, but also sets standards for people going forward. And I think both of those are really important aspects of government.
Yeah, very important work, and glad you and your colleagues are there to deter harmful practices on behalf of the American public. Robert, over to you. Let's spend a little bit of time kind of digging into the work that you do, particularly if you think about right now, it's at the height of summer travel. You have lots of people either taking vacations or trying to see friends and family and loved ones. Last year, you held airlines accountable with a record $8.35 million in fines and more than 1 billion, make sure I get that correctly, more than 1 billion in passenger refunds. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And as you do that, maybe share why it is the government's job to expand passenger rights and protections?
Sure. So the refund initiative has been a major initiative of ours over the past couple of years. Those numbers have now gone up. The recent tally is we've assessed about over $15 million in civil penalties, and that has helped to contribute to airlines providing refunds that were legally required to passengers in an amount over $2 billion. Our civil penalty numbers are not at the level that Lisa has been talking about. Also, though, our litigation is really much faster than that, and in fact, often isn't litigation at all. We engage in settlement the vast majority of the time, and we have only had to take one of those cases to a quasi-litigation approach, which was where the DOT filed a formal complaint in front of a DOT administrative law judge against Air Canada, which at the time had the largest number of violations and was the least willing to settle with the department in terms of providing refunds to affected consumers. So the Air Canada case was the biggest and most significant of the cases, partly because it was the case that really established in the first major consent order of ours that providing refunds was legally required through our DOT orders. We had made this a priority, though, from the very beginning of the pandemic. When the pandemic started in March 2020. In April and May of 2020, our office issued guidance to the industry and guidance to the public, saying that our office expects, despite the economic upheavals of the pandemic, for airlines to provide prompt refunds to passengers when flights are canceled or significantly changed. So we set that expectation from the beginning and indicated that we would give airlines some measure of a grace period of sorts to come into compliance and would take enforcement action as appropriate. And the first big case that we took was Air Canada, and others fell into line after that. We've now issued 12, I believe, consent orders against airlines for refund practices. And this has just been very important because at the time, certainly, and the effects of the pandemic still linger, but consumers had pre-purchased flights, and then the economy tanks, the pandemic hits, airlines canceled flights, and we received thousands of complaints from consumers saying that the airlines are holding on to our money. They canceled our flight, didn't provide the service that they promised that they would provide, and are holding on to our money. And that's just fundamentally unfair. At the time, we did not actually have a specific regulation on point that said that failing to provide a prompt refund was an unfair practice. We had a more vague regulation that said that when refunds are due, then they must be provided within 7 days for credit card purchases. But we did have to, in the Air Canada case, develop an argument that the failure to provide those refunds was unfair based on definitions of unfairness that we had developed that mirror the definitions of unfairness that are found through the FTC. And so I think also from a perspective of transparency, we had just in 2020 issued those definitions. And we said, look, we have a statute that defines unfair, that says that we can prohibit unfair and deceptive practices. We did not actually have definitions of unfair or deceptive, but in 2020, we did, for the purposes of alerting the public and regulated entities about what we really mean, we defined unfair and we defined deceptive. And we considered that a good government measure to let everybody know what the standards are and what the playing field is. Using those definitions of unfair and deceptive, particularly unfair in this case, we developed an argument that failing to provide those refunds was unfair. What we're now doing is developing a regulation that specifically says that failing to provide those refunds is unfair within the meaning of our statute. So there are mixes of government transparency in the sense of we want to let the world know what our standards are, and also accountability on the part of regulated entities to make sure that they are doing the right thing. It is government's role because sometimes the marketplace can reward bad practices or can let entities get away with unfair practices, and some cop has to be on the beat. Certainly Lisa is, and we are, because Congress had provided that the DOT regulates airlines. We actually share jurisdiction with the FTC over sellers of air transportation, ticket agents, online travel agencies, etc. So the refund initiative has been a big one, but that's far from the only thing that we've been working on at the DOT. It's been a very busy office.
Yeah, very busy, very important work. I imagine airline travelers everywhere can actually feel the impact of your work and your colleagues' work in their pocket, which is always a very good way to be able to experience that. Let me make sure that I have enough time to ask you both final questions. I know, Robert, that you have more work that you and your team are doing. You have created a consumer dashboard that I'm sure will yield dividends to those who use it. And I know there's lots of other things that you're doing to help with that accountability that you mentioned. You've done a lot in your career and you're doing a lot in your current job. My last question to you, though, is what advice would you give to someone who might be looking to have a career in public service, maybe similar to yours or just in government more generally? And then, Lisa, I'll turn to you and ask you the same question afterwards.
I would say just get out there and start searching. That's what I did. I was coming from a state court system which had very little connection to the federal system. And so I started from ground zero in terms of seeking out federal service opportunities. And frankly, I hopped on USA Jobs and was diligent about trying to find opportunities that way. Another great option, though, that I didn't personally take advantage of, but I know many of my colleagues have, are internships and what we call honors attorneys positions, where you just out of law school, you start from law school to take internships at federal agencies and can get your foot in the door there. It's a great opportunity to just learn how the system really works on the inside, and gets people to know you, and you make a good impression on folks, and those doors can be opened. But just keep an eye open for both state and federal public service opportunities, and they are certainly there.
Yeah, I think that's great advice to keep the eye open both at both levels that you mentioned. Really appreciate that you've provided an example of when USA Jobs works well. The Partnership for Public Service has a Go Government website to help people explore and better understand the opportunities available. But USA Jobs is certainly one of those, and glad you found your path through that vehicle. Lisa, over to you. Same question. What advice would you have for someone who wants to begin a career in public service?
Well, I think for kids coming out of college, I mean, the internship is a great option. I was a paralegal when I came out of college. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, and so I got a paralegal job at a law firm in town. But we have a bunch of paralegals at DOJ, and I would say we have at least 4 attorneys in our office now who started as paralegals. And the same thing with law clerks. We have a long history of people who come work as not as a lawyer, but as a law clerk or as a paralegal and love it and come back afterwards. And they go to law school and they apply. Oftentimes they even go to firms and then they come to consumer protection, which is where they started. And so I would encourage people, if you're not sure you want to go to law school, be a paralegal. It's actually a great way to see if it's something you might be interested in. The other thing I would add to what Robert noted is talk to people you know. I mean, especially for people that live in Washington, my husband is also a government attorney, and Robert obviously has also a government family. But there are plenty of people who work in various different jobs, especially now where people are remote, that you'll find people all over the country. And I ended up applying for this job because I talked to people when I was looking to leave my firm. I wanted to go into government. And so I talked to a lot of people that were both outside the government and within the government. And, people suggested various government jobs. And one of the jobs that was suggested was consumer protection. They didn't even have openings when I interviewed. I had requested an informational interview and went in to talk to people, and the stars aligned and they ended up having spots that they were able to open, and I got one of those spots. So, I know many people, many young people especially, don't feel like they should ask for help, but they should talk to people. But, there are plenty of public servants that are really excited and interested in the jobs they have. And, it's really even hard to imagine the range of government jobs that are available. And so I think that there's no better way to do it than looking to, your family and your friends and your parents, your friends' parents, to see what's out there. So, I would cast a wide net because I also looked at USA Jobs, but it was really hard for me to figure out what is it that I would want to apply for. I don't even know what these people do. So I feel like at least talking to people gives you a little bit of background knowledge when you decide to apply.
I think that's really sage advice there, casting a wide net. And you're absolutely right. There is an entire world of things that you can do within government, all very important, all different ways to serve the American public. And I think when you think about government, we all want government to work well, and it certainly can't do that without accountability and transparency. So we are so thankful for the efforts that you two are doing and that your teams are doing. And so let me say, on behalf of the Partnership for Public Service and behalf of myself, thank you truly for your service and all that you're doing to keep government functioning well and keep government transparent and accountable. And congratulations once again on becoming a Sammies honoree.
Thank you for having me.